for a master's in sustainable urban planning. My focus was climate change. But, I noticed that there were inequities with regard to how climate change affected communities of color and other marginalized communities. So I focused my attention on affordable housing and on other things that impacted the communities of color. So I started working. I first started volunteering, and then I went and started working for various organizations as a consultant and learning all I could about different aspects of climate change and the impact on Black and Brown marginalized communities. So that's kind of how I got into this business. I worked in affordable housing recently, but my passion is environmental justice. So I'm going to talk. Am I going to give my little 10-minute spiel right now? Okay, great. I'm going to talk a little bit about some history in reference to how the environmental justice movement came about and what it means right now. So originally, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, he was about to, before he was assassinated, about to join a march. He was about to march with the Black sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee, because of the polluted conditions that they worked in. And unfortunately and sadly, he was assassinated, but the march still went on. And that march was the catalyst for the environmental justice movement. So that was one of the first. And after that march, there were some studies done in 1988. There were some studies done called Toxic Waste and Race. And in those studies, they noticed, and there was some statistical significance related to where toxic waste was placed in communities. And 3 out of 5, either Latino, Black, communities of color, those communities were the communities where toxic waste was placed. So it was a significant finding. The study was done again in 2008, and the same findings occurred. So there was a direct relationship between race and toxic sites. So thereby, this movement came about. And in 1991, the Environmental Justice Platform was adopted by the First People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. And it's called the Principles of Environmental Justice. And I will put in the chat when I finish the link to those 17 principles, because they are the foundation for this movement. And just briefly, because I don't want to go through all 17, but the first 5 principles address the sacredness of Mother Earth and, valuing the earth and the species that are on the earth. The second one talks about public policy based on respect and mutual respect and justice for all people. The third one talks about ethical balance and responsibilities in terms of using the land and renewable resources. The third one talks about threatening the fundamental right to clean air, land, water, food. And the fifth one, which is really important, talks about the community's right to self-determination. So these are the principles. There's 17 of them, there's more, but they are the basis of the environmental justice movement. And in order to understand that movement, people should understand those principles. So that was just a little taste of them, but please feel free to go and read them and understand them, because without knowing your history, you don't know where you're going to go, and you don't want to have that same history recur over and over again. So understanding the community's needs and allowing the community to determine, self-determine, and self-direct their own solutions is so important in environmental justice. And climate justice is a subset of environmental justice. Environmental justice includes various types of other environmental issues, such as food and water and you know, all kinds of other issues that impact our environment. Climate, of course, is one aspect of our environment, but that aspect is so big that it impacts the other parts of our environment. So these two are really related, and we need to understand both of them in order to really hone in on the problem and the solutions when it comes to impacting disproportionately the communities of color and other marginalized communities that are impacted by these events that occur because of climate change. Just to give you some background on kind of why I started with environmental justice and moved into climate justice, because they relate. And unfortunately, people suffer. And the people that suffer the most are the people that are the ones who can't do much about it. They don't have as much resources, they don't have as much power, political power. So therefore, when things happen to them, when there's a hurricane or when there's flooding or whatever there is, they don't have the resources and the political power to actually help themselves get back on their feet. I have an example of my family is originally from New Orleans. When Katrina occurred, my family was devastated because they were poor. So a lot of them were placed and moved by the government, and they never returned to their home. This occurred all over, and it occurs all over the country. So we really need to be cognizant and be knowledgeable of what is going on with regards to how climate change and the effects, the negative effects of the climate changing in terms of water, in terms of heat desert, heat islands, how it affects our food. All of those things are environmental, and we need to know what's going on and who is getting just treatment and who's not, and try to do something to help. And there are ways that we can help. And I'm just gonna, I think, do I have a minute or no? If I have a minute, okay. So just, you know, just to kind of go over some of the things that I wrote down, some of the things that we all can do is we can support grassroots organizations that directly work with communities that are impacted by these climate change or other environmental issues, such as gas-fired power plants being placed in their communities. There are some communities in Prince George's County that have 4 gas-fired power plants placed right next to them in their communities. Surface mining, they not only have those things, they have other Superfund sites. A community I'm thinking about is Brandywine in Maryland, Baltimore. So these are communities that are affected, that are predominantly African American, but they are still being impacted by these injustices. So you need to know and learn. That's number one, first and foremost, get educated. The second thing to me, like I said, is supporting groups that are supporting these communities from a grassroots perspective. So that's some of the other things. And also you could use your voice to amplify the situation and amplify these problems to help people along when they get into these situations, because unfortunately these communities they may not be prepared. Some of these communities aren't prepared for the flooding or the things that occur, and they need help to prepare. So I would just say, first get educated, then seek out some grassroots organizations that are doing this work, support them, finally support legislation that will put policies in place, and also equitably distribute any monies that are collected for this purpose. So those are some of the things that off the top of my head, I think that can be done. I think I'm going to stop there. I think I did enough. So I hope I didn't go over, but I'm here to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin. That was wonderful. Wonderful introduction to your work. So we're going to backtrack a little. Reverend Kendra Smith is here with us. I don't see her, but I'm sure she's here. Can everybody see? Oh, there you are. Okay, hi. I'll just introduce again. I'm Carla. I'm from the Green Committee at the Synagogue Tiferet Israel. Welcome. And I'm going to jump in and introduce you and let you speak next, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
If you're ready. Okay. So Reverend Kendra Smith serves as the Go lead, and I wasn't sure exactly what that was, but you can explain, at Kingdom Fellowship AME Church in Silver Spring. And she was selected for the State of Maryland's Governor Service Award in the faith-based category in 2020. She did that. She got the award for her outstanding volunteer coordination. It sounds incredible what you did in service to families in Prince George's and Montgomery counties. And you worked with all these volunteers and leaders and staff to make sure people got access to food. And I'm just going to say your nominator praised you for passion, faith, creativity, and vision. And since March 2020, you've been at Kingdom Fellowship AME Church, and you guys have been providing nearly £500,000 of free groceries to over 33,000 households at 5 distribution sites. And it just, there's a huge team that you're working with. You can explain more. I'm sort of overwhelmed by the number of groups that you're working with. So with that, I'll let you speak.
Is it afternoon? It is. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Robin Lewis. That was amazing. I will definitely be reaching out to you for some other points of connection. But Kingdom Fellowship AME Church, our senior pastor is the Reverend Dr. Matthew L. Watley. We are about 2 years old, but we're 2 years old as Kingdom Fellowship and technically 12 years old because we are the former Reed Temple North campus. We were associated with Reed Temple AME churches in Glendale, Maryland. And then as that pastor retired, Pastor Watley was elevated to the senior pastor of what is now Kingdom Fellowship AME Church. So the Go lead, we have 4 core values at Kingdom Fellowship: gather, grow, give, and go. And the go represents our commitment to go outside of the church, to build relationship, to connect with others who are already doing the work, to serve, to ultimately make an impact. So, you know, we're a church. And so as a faith-based organization, our first mandate is not really to people, it's to God. It is to fulfill the calling that God has on our lives. And we believe that every local church has a responsibility. Every local church has a specific calling, a specific area that we believe that they're called to. So for us, when we look at go, literally our theme is we commit to go. We commit to go outside of our church, go across racial divides, go across cultural divides, being the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. And so that's really the core of our mission. And so what we have been able to do by God's grace in response to the pandemic since March 2020 has been to really be a good steward over what we have been given. Kingdom Fellowship AME Church is a mega church. We have approximately 5,000 members, and God has gifted us to have resource and capacity. And so because of that, there was no way that we could sit on the sidelines when we began to see the need that was presenting itself in our communities. It was a no-brainer for us. Now, I shared with Rabbi previously and with others, we did not necessarily have a grand scheme. We did not have a strategic plan to build all of this. We responded to the need that was presented to us. And once we responded to the need, there was no way that we could turn back from what we had started. We started our first distribution in March of 2020. It was about 500 student-friendly bags. We were working with Prince George's County Public Schools. We had a partnership with them previously. We had already made commitment to work with them. And I think that's important to know as well. So let me back up just for a minute, because I talked about Go and our core value there, which drives everything else that we do. Very strategic, focused church. And also, though, we are very committed to collaboration and partnership. And so when we looked at, when I was hired, I've been at Kingdom Fellowship for 3 years. I'm a former senior pastor and church founder myself. And my background is in social service, human service delivery, community building, grassroots, Robin, doing that work, finding out where the work is. And what I believe theologically is that when you're doing community engagement and community building work around whatever sector you feel called to, that we're not going out into community to make community. Community is already present. Our job is to go and find where God is already working and then connect with God there. So very theologically, from a theological perspective, when we began this work, we did the first one ourselves, but there are many other people who have been doing this work for a very, very, very long time, work as it relates to food insecurity. I mean, obviously, Black people, period, have a relationship with the land. And so because of that, there is a very strong relationship between the Black church and Black farmers in providing for ourselves. So there was no way that we could not respond. So we responded that first Saturday, and we haven't stopped since. We have been serving every Saturday. We went from 0 to 100 very, very quickly, which though is our DNA. That is how our church is wired. And so because of that, we were able, by God's grace, to scale and to leverage. We found that we had, church members who really wanted to serve. So you have people who are lawyers and doctors and philanthropists and, people who are students and college students and young adults. And even some of our older congregation members, we had to sit them down because at one point we said, wait a minute, over 60, you're not supposed to be out here. You need to be careful. But people responded. They responded to the need that we saw. And we were able to, over time, really the number is almost 2 million now. So we've provided about 2 million pounds of food. We've served probably over 70,000 households. And it's not, it's not really about the numbers themselves, but I share that because the impact is so great. When the need that was presented was so great. And that's why we have not stopped. Initially, when the pandemic first hit, we were seeing lines 500, 600, 700 people, households a Saturday. And that's why we knew we couldn't do it by ourselves. And we weren't. There are many other churches, many other nonprofit organizations who've been responding to this need for a very, very long time. What we were doing is filling a gap because the food banks, such as Capital Area Food Bank, Manna Food Center, which is both phenomenal organizations that we have strong partnerships with, they were overwhelmed. It even came to a point where they were not able to meet the demand. And so as it started to level off just a little bit, the need is still very, very prevalent. And I'm going to say, I was talking to a delegate a couple of weeks ago when we gave a tour of one of our new buildings, and they asked, well, what caused the need? Like, why is the need so great? Why are people coming out now? And I shared what many of you already may know on this call, there was already a need before the pandemic. So the issue of food insecurity in Black and brown communities, we were already more impacted than any other, right? What the pandemic did is just exacerbated that need. And so because of that, as people began to lose employment, as people, began to have to shift, even when you're looking at, the vaccine and people, getting sick from COVID and things of that nature, not able to go to work, working families, unable to work, or having to take off work, or may not have the type of job that allows, for benefits on that level where you can call in and take off and have sick leave, but you have to stay home because your child, is sick, or your child is out of school. So that entire time the children were virtual, parents that were on the front lines and parents that had a lot of frontline jobs. And actually, it's not even really just frontline jobs. There were parents who, were making very strong salaries, but they were very challenged because of what was going on with their children. And so if you miss 1 or 2 paychecks, for some people, that is going to put you in a situation. And that's exactly what happened. Missing a paycheck or 2 put people in a very challenging situation. 3 paychecks a month of not working, not being able to pay your rent. And of course, as it relates to food insecurity, what we know is that that will be the first item that a family may check off their list that they will go without in order to keep the lights on, in order to have a roof over their heads. The parent may not eat, but the child might eat. The child might eat, but the child might not eat consistently, or the child might not eat what's healthy and what's nutritious. And so then that also then leads to other issues and challenges as it impacts the child's health, the child's ability to pay attention and function in school. And so because of all of this, we then began to move forward and work and go deeper. So as we started doing these food distributions, we started in one location. Then we began to work with the county council in Montgomery County. And we began 1 minute warning. So let me hurry up. We started working with the county council in Montgomery County. We started working with the county council in Prince George's County. We began to write grants, in order to sustain the work that we started. We eventually became what's called the East County Hub for Montgomery County. And so we have a contract now with the county. It's a regional services center that focuses on food, but layers in other services. We were able to connect with Pastor Heber Brown out of Baltimore, phenomenal leader and pastor with the Black Church Food Security Network. That's one of the ways that we are helping to sustain this work. We are working with them in what's called their Black Church Supported Agricultural Program, where we actually buy directly from farmers in supporting the Black farmers in their work in North Carolina and Virginia. And so I'll stop there because it's a minute warning. I'll just stop right there, and we can kind of, if there are questions or people want to know any more, please, we'll go from there. Thank you so much for letting me share.
Thank you so much, Reverend Kendra. That was very inspiring. And I'm just going to say, Joelle wrote in the chat, she said that what you're doing is responding to the needs and letting that lead the work really exemplifies the environmental justice principles that Robin opened with. So I think that really is the connection for us. So now, Xavier, we would love to hear more about you and what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Reverend Smith and Miss Lewis. And I enjoyed you all's presentations. So my name is Xavier Brown. I guess some people would consider me an urban farmer, but I think I do a little bit more than that. I'm a part of I actually know Heber. I work a lot with Heber in the Black Church Food Security Network. I'm part of a Black farmers collective called the Black Dirt Farm Collective. And also, like Carla mentioned, I'm a co-founder of a worker-owned food cooperative called Southeast. And so I'll kind of like give you all the backtrack on how I got there. So I kind of got into agriculture, or agriculture got into me like 10 years ago, as I was trying to figure out like my next kind of move in life. I just graduated out of undergrad, and I was trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. And my father kind of encouraged me to take a master gardening class at UDC. And so I took the master gardening class, and then I started to just like dove head first into agriculture, dove head first into kind of the history of Black agriculture, and kind of deepening my understanding of my ancestral connections back to the land, right? And understanding that, my grandparents migrated to DC from North Carolina and Georgia to escape kind of white supremacist terror that was happening to them on the land. But when they left the land, they left so much of their identity, they left so much knowledge, they left so much of kind of their being, of their spiritual being, of who they were, was tied into growing food, was tied into the rhythms, was tied into everything of the land. And so kind of gaining that knowledge of like who my ancestors were, that kind of brought me to the place of like, man, I want to reconnect more folks like myself who've grown up in DC, who have no real connection to our food, have no real connection to the land. And like, how can I do that, you know? And so I developed an organization called Soilful. And I tried to connect the word soil and soul and kind of put them together. And I felt like for me personally, when I was like gardening and farming and working with other people, that's when I felt most connected to like my own self, my own being, you know? And so I started Soulful, and I started, you know, working with different communities in Washington, D.C., primarily more something where they African-American communities in public housing, like building gardens, learning about food and just building things out slowly but surely. And as time matured on, I met more returning generation, that's what we call ourselves, returning generation Black farmers and gardeners who were trying to go back and capture what was left or what we lost, you know, or what was left behind. And so eventually we started the Black Dirt Farm Collective. And as time went on, we started to kind of develop our own methodology and understanding. And we got to the point where what we want to do or what we want to see is the idea of food sovereignty. And that's kind of, I'm going to read the definition of food sovereignty. So food sovereignty is the right of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and the right to define their own food and agricultural systems. It puts aspirations and needs of those who produce, distribute, and consume food at the heart of the food system and policies rather than just demands of the markets and corporations. And so what we wanted to do was create something that was people-centered first, that was centered with people first, that was centered with the ecology first, that was centered with nature first. So it wasn't a corporatized kind of agriculture. And as we kind of began to grow, as we began to connect with more people that were part of the climate justice movement, part of the EJ, environmental justice movement, we began to kind of deepen our understanding to know that, you know, there's been a lot of work that's been done that that says that the majority, or at least a third of greenhouse emissions come from the industrial agricultural system. And that could become from deforestation. That's from outright, you know, industrial farming. You have transportation. You have the processing of the food. You have the packaging of the food. You have the refrigeration of the food. You have the retail of the food. You have the waste, right? The whole bunch of food in the grocery store just goes to waste if it's not sold, you know, or it doesn't look right. So all that combined, you think of it on a global scale, you know, how much that affects the climate. And then when you think of it in another, you know, we have this large kind of industrial food system, but then there's a large population of people who still don't have food to eat. And so there's obviously a lot of kind of glaring holes and issues with the system. And so kind of with Black Dirt Farm Collective, what we kind of see our role as, and with Soulful, is like, how can we be a piece to like educate people and reconnect people back in tune kind of with themselves, with the land, but also how can they kind of take what they learn from us and then go back to the communities where they come from and kind of change some things, whether it be on the policy side, whether it be on a more tangible side, where they're actually growing food, whether if it's on the organizing side, where they're talking to people, they're speaking to people, they may be organizing at their church or mosque or wherever they go, they're organizing people and saying, hey, you know, on this Saturday, this Sunday, you know, we got our food from Giant. Maybe we can connect with these farmers. Or this day, you know, we're having this festival. We're doing this. Kind of think local first instead of going to, you know, wherever. You know, I'll use Giant or Shoppers this time. You know, so kind of how can we kind of do our small part, you know, kind of to affect change. And so that's what. So with Black Dirt Farm Collective, what we've begun to do is host these, we call them encounters, but they're these gatherings, these large gatherings for Black farmers, where if you could imagine, we used to hold them on the eastern shore of Maryland on Harriet Tubman's ancestral grounds, where it'd be like 60 or 70 people, and we would camp, and you would come and you would learn you learn some tangible things about farming, right? Composting, how to grow food. You know, you would leave with some stuff like that, but you would get some political education around food, right? Because we know, at least definitely from a lot of people in this country, food has been used as a weapon many times, right? And when you look at the industrial food system, we're really not that far removed from kind of the plantation style of system that started back with slavery. We're really not that far, removed from that when you kind of really, really put your eyes on it. And so we give people that kind of education, and it allows people to come together and commune with one each other and really, really build and grow. And we were hosting those gatherings, those encounters on a regular basis. This is pre-COVID. So we were going to have one right when COVID popped off. We haven't had one since. But hopefully, God willing, we can have one this year, potentially. But we were having these gatherings, and we came up with this methodology called Afroecology, which is a spin off of a terminology called agroecology. And agroecology it's I would say my quick definition of agroecology would be all of our ancestral kind of ways of growing. So everybody, I can see the rabbi, I can see Miss Lewis, I can see Carla, I see Kendra, or Reverend Smith. We all come from different backgrounds, because as far as back as we go, there'll be somebody who had their hands in the soil somewhere in the world, wherever, right? And those people, whoever they were their great-grandmothers, great-grandfathers, had some type of scientific or some type of methodology that they use on a regular basis that was in tune with themselves and that was in tune with nature. So it didn't extract from the land, but it gave to the land as much as they took, right? And they understood that there's natural abundance in the land, right? So they don't have to think that we have to hoard more. There's abundance, Whenever you grow food, you always have extra. You're going to share it with somebody. And so that's kind of a quick definition of what agroecology is. And agroecology is like a global methodology of farming, of growing food. And so we put our own spin on it called Afroecology, right? And we wanted to kind of have that self-determination where we kind of define what growing food for 20 something at that time. I'm 30, in my 30s now, but in our 20s, early 30s, like, what does food mean for growing food mean for young Black people coming up? How can we define it for ourselves? Because so much of our understanding of growing food for Black people has been defined by something else, right? And it's been defined not necessarily by the land, but what happened to us on the land, if that makes sense. And so we've been kind of slowly building that out. And we've actually, fortunately enough, we've gotten to the place where we recently, last April, we collectively purchased 24 acres of land in Brandywine, Maryland, in PG County, Maryland. And I would love for y'all to come out and check it out. But it's a beautiful space. And we're looking to host more gatherings, more opportunities for education, and more places for people to just be. So that's the Black Dare Farm Collective. And as a offshoot of the Black Dare Farm Collective, myself and another member and one of our friends, we started a worker-owned food cooperative called South Eats, which is a spinoff of Southeast DC. And we essentially we realized that the food system is like broken up into these different parts. And so how can we kind of tie it together, right? Run into everybody's going, living their lives fast. You wake up, you get home from work, you might not have time to cook or whatever. So it's almost like a hyper-local version of like a HelloFresh, right? But our focus was like, how can we get the food from, or as much as possible, from like Black farmers and local farmers and women farmers. And it's like pre-portioned, pre-cut. So that's where I was this morning. It's pre-portioned, pre-cut, and all you have to do is like cook it yourself and eat it, right? And you can trace back you got your beef from, or your chicken from, or definitely beef and chicken and your vegetables, not so much your fish as of yet. But that's South Eats, and we wanted to kind of do it with cooperative principles, which is why it's a worker-owned cooperative. So I can go on and on, but I appreciate you all having me on here. It's been fun, so I'm going to cut it short. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really, really so interesting and fantastic. So now I think Franca is keeping tabs of the questions that are coming up. So I'm gonna give it to Franca.
So just a reminder that you are welcome to put questions in the chat, and then we'll read them out and share them with the panelists. So the first question is, are there intersections between food insecurity and climate environmental insecurity? Can faith communities and their leadership engage local businesses to take steps to create healthier environments? And it specifically refers to faith communities, but I'm going to broaden that question out and say any one of the panelists could talk about that.
I'm reading the question again. I'm reading the question again.
Yeah,
I am too. I'm reading it.
can I repeat it slower again?
Yeah, I will repeat it slower. Are there intersections between food insecurity and climate environmental insecurity?
Yes.
And then the next question really has to do with engaging local businesses to take steps to create healthier environments. So, if you think of a farmer as a business, that might be the kind of example of what Xavier is doing. But are there connections with local businesses that could be made to advance environmental justice?
Robin, you nodding your head as in you want to.
No, Reverend Smith, you first. You look like you were nodding before me.
I was going to say, go ahead, Robin, take it away. Yes, because all things intersect. So one thing is always going to impact the other. Just as Xavier and Robin were speaking of, and from a faith-based perspective, everything is interconnected. And so that for me, that's yes. I think that when you talk about working with businesses in order to create healthier environments, absolutely, right? Being able to help businesses, and even when you think about smaller businesses, because one of the challenges, are working with smaller businesses and helping them to create the infrastructure so that they are able to afford, that they're able to have the ability to create healthier environments within their organizations. If you're even talking about from a capital perspective and how even a building or a organization is built in terms of the building itself, the materials that are being used, all those types of things are very, very important. But you also look at, for me, from a healthy perspective, also looking at, there is, and Xavier, I'm sure you probably know more about this, some of the smaller grocery stores and things that are in the district or in more urban areas, and helping them to have healthier food options and helping them to be able to carry healthier food options. But all that's connected to being able to support the smaller business to be able to even do that, right? Because sometimes they don't have the infrastructure or the capacity to do that. So how then can we leverage and advocate, whether it's from a perspective where you're advocating with your council member, you're advocating, with your county executive, in terms of those businesses being able to have equity, so they're able to afford to make those types of changes that they need to make. And how can you have smaller businesses that are in communities and not even just inner city communities? When I think about East County and the area where we're located, where there are high population of African-American, Hispanic, immigrant, refugee populations, and they had a global food, right? That came into the space and was able to open up business there. But how can you also work with other businesses, other smaller businesses, to be able to offer those same types of services so that you don't necessarily have a lot of food deserts and things like that? So that's one thought that I have, but I think probably Robin and Xavier can take it even deeper.
Well, thank you. What you said is right on point. I think, in terms of connection between climate or environmental justice, and the question went away. I was reading it, the environmental justice and food insecurity. So when we're talking about environmental justice covers more than just what people think in terms of air, water, land. It encompasses food, because where does the food come from? So there is definitely intersectionality between environmental justice, between food justice, between social justice. All of them are under one realm, okay? I consider environment anything that impacts your environment, whether you breathe it, whether you eat it, whether you work in it, whether you live at it. So all of those things encompass your environment. So of course, food justice is an element of environmental justice. When I went out and I started working with Interfaith Power and Light the first time, I came back. It was so great working with various churches. I was working with Black churches, and I interviewed various pastors and ministers in Prince George's County and across the state. And a lot of them didn't know what environmental justice was. And when I got down to it, I said, well, what is your problem? What happens in your community? And one pastor said, well, we don't even have a grocery store. We have no place to buy fresh foods. People have to take the bus and go somewhere and bring stuff back. And if you're doing all of that, then are you getting fresh foods? Are you getting things that you need, healthy foods? So those things are justice issues. And so it's a total intersectionality, okay, of all of these things. And I'm glad you guys are working with Pastor Heber Brown. He's phenomenal. He was working with my church. I've met with him several times about different things, but having our own being self-sustaining, which Xavier mentioned earlier, which I'm going to let him speak to, is so important in terms of businesses. So even supporting small initiatives. I would love to see co-ops, more co-ops in our communities. When I'm from Jersey, there was some co-ops there more, I saw more, but down here, I have to go somewhere, there's maybe 2 in Prince George's County. So those kinds of things, those little initiatives that can be supported by others, whether you live in that community or not, you can support other communities and their initiatives to not just grow their own food, but to sell food and to help small farmers to bring those foods to these communities who can't get to them. So that's all I'm going to say. Go ahead, Xavier. Take it away.
Oh, sure. Okay, thank you. I'm going to try to veg you back off what you all said. So there's definitely intersections for sure. And so like the frontline communities that are going to be most impacted, insecurities will be like the communities that will be most impacted by whatever climate kind of catastrophe happens, right? It's going to be the same people, similarly to like what you've seen during COVID. A lot of the communities that are hit hardest by COVID are the same, most likely going to be the same communities that are going to that are food insecure, right? And so those, like the inequities are kind of almost like exacerbated, or they just, a light is kind of like shined on them a little bit harder. And so kind of just reading the question, I definitely think that faith communities and their leaders can engage local businesses. One thing about faith communities is that they're already organized bodies of people, right? And so if they're already organized, it's easier for them to move as a unit. They can move as a unit. And what Ms. Lewis said about whatever it is, they can create their small co-ops within their community, right? And so let's say there was a church or a temple or whatever, and they connected with a farmer, and they were like, hey, there's 70 of us, we're going to join, all 70 of us are going to join this CSA, right? Like that would kind of make a small farmer's day right there. You might fill up all their slots for a CSA right there. And the pickup location might be at, whatever day you all meet or whatever day you all choose. And something like that, you all might be able to kind of find ways to say, hey, right now we're just getting vegetables. We want to get eggs, we want to get apples, we want to get whatever. But you all kind of organizing and working together, you all can kind of set a precedent of like what it looks like to really kind of make those changes and make those local changes. And kind of like what we're seeing right now with when everybody's going to the grocery store, posting on Facebook where there's no chicken on the shelves, there's like everything is empty. Imagine it to a local farmer that had for whatever that you eat right now, then it's like, we don't have to go to the grocery store. We can just, stay connected to our farmer and then see what they have. Because I'm pretty sure that they have something, that's available. There's a lot of ways, and there's a lot of opportunities to be creative too, to think about, what can we do that hasn't been done, or you can kind of steal something back from the past. What were folks doing in the past, pre-large box grocery stores? I mean, people were still eating. So I'm sure there was ways that people were thinking and organizing together, and trying to reduce their footprint on, on the earth and stuff like that. So I think that was a great question.
Thank you all. Just a ton of food for thought there. We could just go on with that question for the next half hour, but we do have some others coming in. So this is a long one. I'm going to read it slowly. And hopefully this is really directed at Reverend Kendra, because it's a religious question, but you all should feel free to answer it. So Psalm 24 says, "The Lord owns the earth, and it contains the world and all who live in it." Psalm 104 says, "You have spread out the heavens like a tent. He has fixed the earth on its foundation so that it will never be shaken." And the psalm goes on to talk about other features of, the natural world. So the question that this person is asking is, to what prayers or spiritual passages do you turn for, the questioner says environmental inspiration. I'm going to broaden it out a little bit, for inspiration in the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, that we're clear that God has put us on this earth to be a representation of God's self, and that we are called to be stewards of the land. God called us, the land technically from a theological perspective doesn't belong to us, it was given to us. And since it was given to us, we are called to take authority and to be good stewards over that which has been given. And so that's one. And then Genesis 2, he goes on to say that he put Adam in the garden to work the land, right? To till the land. And so again, we are representations of God's self. The other is, for me, John 6, which is in all four Gospels. And this is a New Testament reference. And that's Jesus feeding the 5,000. And it's a beautiful reference. And Xavier, it speaks to something I heard you say when you talked about abundance, especially in the Gospel of John, which speaks to God's abundant grace that God gives us, and that there is no lack. The disciples, were overly concerned and anxious because there were so many people that were there. It was more than 5,000 men, because they only counted the men. Thank God those days are over, but they only counted the men. So it was over 5,000, and they only had 2 fish and 5 barley loaves. And of course, the understanding of that passage is that they felt like they didn't have enough. But in the presence of God, there was more than enough. In fact, it went from insufficiency, and literally the text says they ate all that they wanted, that they were satisfied and they had more left over. So the understanding for me is that from a theological perspective, I'm not doing this work by myself, because if I do believe I'm doing this work by myself, I am going to come to a point where I don't feel like I have enough resource. But I understand that in the economy of God, and God's economy, in working with others, in sharing with others, that we can find a way that we actually have all that we need, and we have more than what we need. To Xavier's point, when you're farming and working the land, I believe you said, we always have something to share. We always have something left over for someone else. And so those are 2 of the 3 of the passages that I lean on very strongly when I'm doing this work. Because again, from a faith-based perspective, I can have gift, I can have talent, without the grace of God, without the power of God pushing me forward and giving me the insight and the wisdom to use those gifts, right? To use those talents, it means nothing. And so that's my perspective on that. There are many more. I'm a preacher, so I could go on, but I'm gonna close with that one, Robin. I'm gonna let them have it with that one right there.
And I love that. And thank you for sharing those scriptures. I, in turn, look at also the aspects in scripture that talks about justice.
Yep.
So, one of my favorites is Isaiah 1:17, which says, learn to do justice, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. I also look at Psalms. Blessed are those who act justly, who always do what is right. God loves justice. So for me, whenever I do presentations on environmental justice a lot. And when I do them, those are the scriptures I bring up, because I want to start with the foundation that, yes, we are stewards of this earth. We don't own it, we're stewards. And we were placed here to take care of everything on this earth and not pollute and destroy. And also, we are called to be just. We're called to support people who can't help themselves, who are marginalized, who are vulnerable. That's our job. So, my passion is justice. So that's where I'm going to take it and leave it there.
Yes, I'll jump in. I don't have a particular scripture, but I do have some thoughts that I'm sure connect to some scriptures. And so for me, whenever, I would spend a lot of time on the land, it would always be a good place to like reflect, right? And so like when you're like planting seeds, you realize like how much control that you don't have over what happens, over the outcome, right? So there's so many other factors. Like if we were to hold seeds in our hand for, I don't know, 30 hours, nothing would happen. But we plant seeds in the soil, and over a course of time, there's so many things that are outside of our human control that make things happen, whether it's the water, whether it's the soil, whether it's all the different microorganisms that are kind of around us that that make things happen. So for me, it's just about like faith and believing, because there's literally so much out of your control that you can't make happen. You can't control. And so that's one thing. And then another thing for me is when I first started gardening, I would garden at this garden in Southeast called Fort DuPont. And there would always be like at a certain time of night, the deer would come in. It'd almost be like a changing of the guard. Like humans would be out, and then dusk comes and the deer is like, it's y'all time to roll. It's our time. And so it just made me think that like how much the humans are a part of a larger ecology, right? We're like a part of a larger system. We're not really in control. We think we are, but when you really think of it, there's not too many beings on Earth that actually need humans to survive. If you let your dog out, if there was no cars, your dog would probably figure it out. Your cat would figure it out. You let your fish back out into the water, they would figure it out. And so just kind of figuring out like what is our place within the larger ecology of just world with all these other kind of creations and creatures that God has kind of put here for us to kind of coexist with. So those are just some of the thoughts. I'm sure one of you all brilliant people can kind of tie that back to scripture, but those are like a lot I'm always ruminating and reflecting on kind of when I'm out there, like either looking at my plants that got eaten by some deer or planning on, planting some new stuff. Yeah.
So there's a lot of interconnectedness in all the things that you talked about, our interconnectedness with each other, our interconnectedness with God, our interconnectedness with nature. And so this question is a little bit about interconnectedness. The person putting the question asked specifically about the role of bread for the city in food distribution and food security issues, but I'm going to broaden that and say, could you talk about the partnerships you formed during the pandemic that helped you with the work of food security? And, were there surprises? Were there partners who stepped up that you didn't expect? Talk about that a little bit. This one came from the chat, so you won't see it in the Q&A. So again, it was a question focused on bread for the city, but maybe we can take it as a partner in food security, but maybe we can take it a little bit larger and just say, who were some of your key partners in dealing with food security issues, particularly during the pandemic and the time we're living through now.
Reverend Kendra.
Oh, okay. I was waiting to see. I was like, I don't know. I was looking at Robin and Xavier's box to see. So obviously, this work is too big to try to do it by yourself. It is always about partnership and collaboration. And so there were some surprises. The obvious were the food banks. So the Capital Area Food Bank, the Manna Food Bank. I do know for Bread for the City, they are in DC. So we didn't do a lot of work with Bread for the City because we operate in Montgomery and Prince George's County, but Bread for the City has a very strong network and support system in DC to support those that live in that area. And so, but outside of the Capital Area Food Banks, the Mannas and things like that, I was able to, as Xavier mentioned, and Robin, connect with Pastor Heber Brown in the Black Church Food Security Network. And that has been a strong partnership. And to your point, Xavier, we are, partnering with actual farmers and supporting the work that they do and working directly with them. So we're purchasing collard greens, yams, with all that tomatoes. We did an event with them for the holiday, and we got jam and, all grits, everything from a farmer in Virginia. And so we are committed to that. And there are other Black farmers that are in Montgomery County. They're not a lot, but they are enough. The capacity that we're putting out, we do need a farmer that has that same level of capacity. But the point is, by us adopting a farmer and working with that farm consistently in season and out of season, the point is not just to, be able to access what they have, but also to support the work they do, because it takes infrastructure. It takes equipment, they have to have support. And so our commitment is to that as well. So that's one obvious one. The other one was we had a lot of private sponsors. So Montgomery County has a very involved, intricate system as it relates to responding to food insecurity. So they have the Montgomery County Food Council. And the Montgomery County Food Council is a very strong advocate in Montgomery County around food insecurity. And so Montgomery County has been able to bring really all of the players together and create this really elaborate ecosystem where we're all connecting and talking to each other about what we're doing and sharing support and sharing resources. The Montgomery County, I think it was called the Food Security Fund, is a public-private partnership that was launched by Will Jawando and the County Council in Montgomery County. And so that was bringing together private and faith-based organizations to support the work of food insecurity, to actually fund it. So they're actually working to create funding to support, whether it's farmers, whether it's the food banks, whether it's those very smaller, because we have a lot of what some may even call mom and pops, food banks, what I mean? And being able to help them grow and evolve. And so that was a very strong partnership as well. Great story. We have a church that's right across the street from us. We know them very well, but we never really did any work together. Another Black church, Rainbow, I think it's Rainbow Christian Church, but their CDC is called Rainbow Community Development Corporation. And it wasn't until the pandemic that we actually started working together. And nothing separates us but street. And we put our resources together. We were able to purchase refrigeration and shared storage space and stuff like that, as you deal with, kind of these fresh vegetables and produce. Now they're putting food in our freezer. Do you have a space? We're putting food in their freezer. Do you have space? And they're also a key partner in our hub. So they're actually one of the other satellite partners that we're working with in order to ensure that those that are in the East County area have access to food. So we are working together as a collaborative, and we're helping to support each other. So it's not competitive and it's not about comparison, but it's about our ability to work together to support. So where I'm strong, you can be stronger. And where you have strength, you bring that. They have an ability to source food in a variety of different ways. That's their strength. And so I lean on their strength. We have ability we have capacity and we have infrastructure You know what I mean? We're able to scale programs up. We can take something that was small and work with you over time, and we can multiply it. That's just a gift that our church has. So we're willing to share that with others so that they can do the same, because it is about equity. It's about, wanting to ensure, that everybody has the ability. It might look different based on your size. It might sound different, but the principle is the same. And to Robin's point, it is to ensure that everybody has access. Regardless of where you are, what zip code you live in, everybody should still be able to have that same type of access. So in order for us to do that, we've had to partner. And we've had to, in some ways, we had to say, hey, no, that's not that doesn't fit us. But why don't you go over to this organization and that fits you? So I could talk forever about collaboration and partnership. It has been amazing what people have come together to do during this pandemic.
Well, you just answered that question all by yourself. That's really on point. I, was involved more on the climate justice side, like the Climate Justice Alliance, which is a big alliance with grassroots organizations, and they have a food sovereignty group. Also, I just was selected to be a board member on Why Hunger, which supports grassroots organizations. So I've been getting involved more from a organizational perspective, supporting grassroots efforts. I love what you said. I wrote it down about adopting a farmer. I'm going to take that back to my pastor. We're going to adopt a farmer. So, Xavier, maybe you're the farmer, right? Adopt a farmer. I love that, because that's a way to support from a grassroots perspective these initiatives that bring food to areas that don't have access to food. I love this. I love this work.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you.
So that was in full disclosure. That's Heber's idea.
Yes.
He sold me on it, and I said, okay, just connect us. That I got that from him.
Yeah, he's wonderful like that. So Xavier, your turn, because you're the farmer.
Yeah. So this is a good question. It made me do some thinking. So we actually got money from CJA, from Climate Justice Alliance, and Wild Hunger. We're connected with them pretty deeply. But for South Eats, we worked a lot with Fresh Farms, because they had a farmers market over in Northeast DC in Mayfair, and they allowed us to. So what makes our kind of food delivery thing unique is that we accept EBT, and so we didn't have the actual machine to accept it, but they allowed us to utilize their machine. So Fresh Farms was super important for us. There was a store, what is it? I can't remember the name of the store, but there was a grocery store that just opened up on, I guess that's South Capitol Street on the southwest side in DC, a new grocery store by a guy named, I'm sorry, his name is Phil, who runs the store, but I can't remember the name of the store, but he allowed us to use his store for space. It's so many different things that helped us kind of, whether we had cold storage trucks to move stuff from point A to point B. We connected with a bunch of farmers who had different things that kind of helped us fill a lot of holes. I mean, so many different things. And that's on the South Eats. For Black Deer Farm Collective, our entire operation without an interconnected network wouldn't function. So definitely Why Hunger, definitely CJA, we're kind of part of that. National Black Food and Justice Alliance, we're a part of that as well. And all of those networks, whether if it's exchanging information, being able to get access to grant dollars, whether if it's we call it going in together, but it's everybody coming to help raise a barn or do something, but just that kind of collective work and responsibility. So that's literally how we function, what I'm saying? That's how we were functioning pre-pandemic. And so going through the pandemic, it kind of was a process that we had already kind of established, so it worked even more smoothly. But I think that's something that we all, can kind of do to that's kind of how, if we don't take care of each other and work together, then we're not going to survive. So, yeah.
Thank you. So I'm just going to jump in with a question of my own. Robin, you mentioned as one of the principles of environmental justice, this idea of community self-determination. And I wondered if you could talk about that, and the rest of you could talk about that. You've touched on that idea, but if you could talk about that more in terms of the work that you've been doing.
So when, unfortunately, a lot of times when people with good intentions come into communities that are suffering, they come in with ideas of how it should be, or how something should happen, or how you should form whatever. Versus coming into the community, listening to what's going on, listening to what they need, and asking the community to come up with their own solutions and determine how they're going to proceed. And actually, you're a guest when you go into that community. You don't, that's not your community, you're a guest. So what you're doing when you're as a guest is you're gracious and you ask, what do you need? What can I do? So self-determination allows that community to determine what they need to do, their own solutions, so that they have buy-in. It's about the community doing for themselves. We want self-sufficiency. We don't want someone to come into the community and do it for us. We want the community to do it for themselves. You can provide them with resources, with tools, whatever you need to provide them with their permission, mind you. So that's what it means when I say self-determination. First, listen to what they're talking about, what they need. Don't come in with assumptions about what they should have. It's about what they want, what they need, what they want to do. Let them determine what is going to happen and what the solution for their issue or the injustice that is occurring in their community, how to solve that injustice. And if they don't know, provide resources. Allow them to come to those decisions, not the person coming in as a guest. That's what I mean.
Do either of the other panelists want to comment on that question?
I can, I guess. Yeah, I mean, just to continue on with what Ms. Lewis was saying, I mean, for us, I guess with like Black Dirt, there's always, I think, for us, we view it as like Black people have always been self-determined in this country, whether if it's like you have Fannie Lou Hamer in Mississippi with Freedom Farms, right? They've been self-determined. They've been self-determining. Whether you can use the Black Panthers with like the free breakfast program, right? That kind of got adopted by the U.S. government. I mean, you have multiple Black churches popping up all over everywhere. And there's been multiple kind of community-based programs that have always popped up. I think for me, the big thing about self-determination is that a lot of times you see like a counter push against like Black self-determination or self-determination from minorities in this country. Like things get shut down because they're looked at as threats, So, but I think there's always been self-determination. Obviously, like urban farming and community gardening and food sovereignty is focused on self-determination. So that's always, I feel like that's always been like a common thread that's always been, with typically like minority communities, whatever community you go to, whatever part of the world, there's going to be some type of self-determination, whether it's people saving seeds so they can grow the next year, whether it's people starting their own schools, whatever it is, it's always been a form, and self-determination is like a form of resistance when you look at it, a form of survival. And it's always been, I think it's an important part. And I think it's something that kind of really sustains a lot of people, a lot of different communities, and a lot of beautiful things come out of like the idea of self-determination. That's, where you get a lot of like your beautiful arts, a lot of so much beauty comes out of like those movements, I mean, I guess you could consider like hip hop music is birthed out of that. You know what I'm saying? A lot of these unique styles. So yeah, I mean, I feel like self-determination becomes like almost like a way of life. I think that's what we do. And we try to plug in and connect to other organizations and individuals to kind of have that, see the world in a similar point of view.
I would agree with Xavier and with Robin. And to Robin's point, that's our perspective as well when we're working with community in providing food. people having the option to decide what they want. So sometimes, when you're providing a box of food, right? And it has a variety of different items in there. And I remember there would be people who would bring some boxes back, or they would take out what they wanted and said they didn't want the rest. And some of my volunteers and staff were like, I can't believe them. They're not grateful. They don't want to receive. I said, wait a minute. First of all, now, you don't know them and they don't know you. So as Robin said, even if I'm Black, just because I go into another Black community doesn't mean that I have a right to tell somebody what they should and shouldn't receive. So they have every right to take out whatever they want out of that box and say, hey, listen, thank you, but I don't use this, and I'm going to give this back. Because there's a perception that we have that because I'm in need, I have to accept what you give me the way that you give it to me. And that's not self-determination. That is bondage. That means I'm going to tell you what you think you should have. And, that can even happen in our own communities. And so I said, no, they have a right to do that. Also, it shows itself in listening, as Robin said, into what people do like. So we learned that our Latin friends, our Latin communities, they don't know what to do with collard greens. So I have to find another type of green that they like and that they can eat. Why? Because I want somebody to give me what I like. I don't want someone to give me something I'm not going to eat. So what is this understanding that whatever I give you should be okay? No, that's not the philosophy that we operate under, which means I have to do more work. That means I have to go and talk to Xavier and say, listen, our Latin communities, they don't eat collard greens. And I go to the Latin community and find, what do you eat? And then they tell me what they eat. And then I go find a way to source it. That's our goal. Our point is to try to source it in a way that's meaningful. And so when you talk about self-determination in a community, it's nothing worse about you having this idea, right, about what you think people need or how they need it or when they should have it. People say, oh, well, you serve every week. Why you all serve every week? Pastor Wiley said people have to eat every day. Tell me one time you didn't have to eat every day. Unless you're fasting or you're in some type of ritual, you eat every day. So of course, we're going to do what we can to source food and offer it weekly. And it's not just going to be canned food. It's going to be produce. It's going to be food that we feel that you can eat. And so we're talking about basically culturally appropriate food. And so I want to be responsive to people. So that means I have to then get better refrigeration. That means I have to get better cold storage. It puts more responsibility on me. But again, to much is given, much is required. So if you have the ability to do that, right? The Bible says, don't tell somebody, it's a sin to tell somebody you can't give them what they need today and they have to wait till tomorrow if you have it today. If I have it today, then I work like a woman in a man filled with passion to make sure I get it to them today so they don't have to wait till tomorrow. Sorry, y'all, that was a preach point right there. I'm sorry, I had to go there.
Amen.
That was terrific. That was just great. So we have a bunch of questions that really focus around what we can do to support all of you. I just want to find out since that's such a good way for us to wrap up, leaving a message of what we can take forward into the world as a result of this conversation. I want to see if anybody has any other questions before we go into that. Okay, I'm going to assume since nobody's popping up in the chat or the Q&A. So there are a couple of them that have come in. One of them specifically related to urban agriculture and Black farmers in DC. One of them related to us being a small congregation, a small religious institution. How can we support? And then there's one which is more involved, which I'm actually going to read. And I think the panelists, Judah, if you can put that in the chat so everybody can see it. But here's the question. As a mostly white congregation, we know we are implicated in and have benefited from the unjust systems that have created environmental injustice that you all are addressing, and that community sovereignty and self-determination is so important to repairing that harm. So that's what we were just talking about. What would you ask a synagogue like TI to do first to support your work and your leadership?
I'll just say from a a higher level, I think I mentioned this before, supporting local grassroots organizations. I love the Adopt a Farmer. I love doing farmers markets. I love doing those kinds of things, or even funding, because a lot of people forget about this, especially when it comes to education and outreach. Nobody wants to pay for that. And that's where it starts, with education and outreach. You know, I was a consultant for years, and it was so hard. I mean, Interfaith Power and Light, I have to give kudos and shout out to them. They supported my efforts in education and outreach to communities and to Black churches to educate them about climate, environmental issues. So just supporting from a financial perspective, some of the activists really does make a big difference. And finding local organizations that are doing things in the community and asking them, you know, finding out what they need and providing them with those resources that they may need. That's another thing. And stay informed. I'm big on legislation. I mean, what is going on in your state, in your community, your local community legislation that revolves around environmental health, environmental human, like for instance, in Maryland, the environmental human rights amendments. I mean, there are other other legislation that support this work as well. So it has to be done in multi-pronged approach, you know, starting with grassroots, starting with local organizations, moving on up to, you know, changing policy and equitable distribution of funds once the policies have been changed. So my approach is all those prongs. It has to be at the really low level, grassroots, supporting agencies, legislation, first and foremost, educate yourself, and, you know, supporting people like Reverend, I was going to call you Pastor Smith, see, I'm putting that out there, Reverend Smith's work, and also Xavier's work. I mean, it is so important to support those grassroots efforts, because they need it, and that's where the funding gets distributed, down at the grassroots. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I'll veg you back on what Ms. Lewis said. I think everything she said was great, and I agree with that. The only thing I would add, because I think she hit a lot of points that I agree with, is I mean, I think it's always important for like education and like self-study and stuff like that. And so it would be interesting to see like at the synagogue, you all a small and intimate group, what would it look like to have a study circle, you know what I'm saying? And like studying about different different Black political movements within that have happened throughout time, you know, whether if it's Dr. King, whoever it is, whether if it's Fannie Lou Hamer, whether if it's Ella Baker, you know, it could be a tons of people, but just like gaining that understanding. And then I'm sure once you kind of do that, so many ideas and things and like connections that you didn't see would kind of maybe appear themselves. They would kind of show themselves to you, right? Because the more knowledge you have, the more things that you will be able to recognize. And the more ways you might be even able to recognize that, like, wow, I didn't know that back in 1940, this rabbi was doing something with this person down in Mississippi or something like that. I didn't know these people were working together. You know what I'm saying? We may be able to kind of replicate this movement. You know, why did this movement shut down? You know, or, oh, I didn't know that, you know, there's a way for us to, if we just kind of divert, I don't know, a little bit of this right here, we can kind of help something else raise off the ground, you know? So I think there's like those types of ways. And then that kind of the knowledge that you all get from like a study circle can kind of get, I think, passed down to the younger generation. Because I'm realizing that there's so much of like, of this stuff that we're talking about, right? There's all like adults here, but there should be kids here too, because whatever we don't fix, whatever we mess up, they gonna step right into it. You know what I'm saying? They like run into a tidal wave of like all types of stuff. So like, how can you already prepare the younger generation to that's a part of the synagogue to understand whatever African Americans are going through, and vice versa. And so you have that kind of solidarity already built in from a younger age, and there's a deeper part of understanding of each other, because that's really, at least in my opinion, through like solidarity and people working together is the only way we're gonna get out of like the looming kind of climate disasters that are gonna happen. Unless like we gotta all go to Mars or something with the billionaires and stuff. But yeah, so that's what I'm thinking about. So yeah.
I agree. I think they hit it. I don't really have much more to add. Well, one thing, I always got something to add. I think Robin was talking about education, and I would just say, know your motivation. Kind of, understand, what your desires are, and what's motivating those desires, and be willing to learn and to be with. Serve with, find opportunities to serve. I think Xavier gave us an offer. I'm going to follow you up on that. I want the tour. I want to come see everything that's going on, and find also what's meaningful for you, because obviously there's something that your congregation has an interest in. And to my understanding, this is a part of who you all are. You're even hosting this, right? And so begin to look at where that intersects, and connect with the grassroots level. You know what I mean? Serve and fund. I'm not going to be too shy to say it. If somebody has the ability to fund an initiative or an effort, to do that, you know what I mean? So that we can continue, to Xavier's point, to scale up, not just for us, but for the next generation. Yeah.
Carla, so first of all, thank you very, very much for those really inspiring words and those challenges. And I really hope that we will take them up. I know the rabbi wanted to say a few words in closing, and I think somebody had asked actually for a repeat of the bios just to get your backgrounds again. So I'm going to turn it back to Rabbi Werbo.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Franca, for helping to coordinate this program. Thank you to Carla for being a moderator. And thank you to our panelists, to Xavier Brown, Robin Lewis, and Reverend Kendra Smith. Thank you all so much. I think that rather than trying to redo the bios from earlier, we'll have their information available. We'll send some stuff out to the congregation. I think we can compile some resources that you all can send us and be able to get this information to the congregation. I just in closing, two things that I've been thinking about. One is how we so often have this experience of looking to learn something and find out how much more I really don't know and need to learn. So I thank you so much for opening up a world to me and to us today. And second of all, is part of that world is some of the things of what we can do. I love the idea of adopting a farmer. When another congregation I was part of, we had a CSA that we coordinated with and had drop-offs at the synagogue, and I'd love to see us doing that and starting something like that. So Xavier, I'll be in touch about who you might suggest to have a CSA with, if that's an appropriate thing, and so many other things that we can be doing, and I think that this can really be a beginning for me, for so many of us, in thinking about how we can approach this issue, and to be partners with so many other people. So I thank you all so much. And unless there's anything else, I think that'll conclude our program.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for inviting us.
You're all very
Yeah.
welcome.
And
Thank
I'll be
you
in
very
touch
much.
with both you, Xavier, and you, Reverend Smith.
Yes.
So-
Can you, Xavier, Robin, put your information in the chat, or what I'm going to do is I'm put my email in there to the panelists.
Okay,
It's great that we're able to connect the three of you. That's really nice.
yes.
Xavier, I definitely want to talk to you and Robin. I've got another panel I think I may want you to help us with, so I look forward to connecting with you.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Shabbat shalom to everybody. This is going to stay open. I think, or no, it could get closed down, but we'll see. But don't feel like you have to stay on any longer.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you later. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Anybody have any thoughts or ways that we might continue this work? Rabbi, you already mentioned one.
Yeah, no, I think I think a good thing to do would be to put out a call to see if there's people that want to start to think about what other things we can do.
Yeah, I put a note in the chat in case anybody wants to get in touch with me directly, but also we'll put something out. We'll send out some resources based on this conversation. And thank you all for taking the time to do this. Thanks to Judah and to Sherry behind the scenes, and to Carla and to Rabbi Werbo, and to the rest of the Social Action Committee for all the wonderful programs that are running this weekend. So,
And I will mention one thing. I'm going to reach out to him, but if you could have Xavier back again to just do something on either farming in your neighborhood, or I think that would be an amazing workshop for this congregation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
A lot of fun.
Yeah.
Super. No, this was great. I enjoyed the conversation. The panelists were well picked. I'll let Carla know. I think she scurried, but
and Franca.
Yeah.
Franca worked very hard on it.
Thank you very much. It was very good.
Great job.
Great. All right.
Very good.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Okay, enjoy the game, Rabbi.
Will do. I hope so.
Bye-bye.
Bye.